The whole world was watching when Air Force One made an emergency landing in a small Montana town during the worst blizzard in decades. But nobody expected what happened next. Asterisk, because in the next 48 hours, Donald Trump would prove it sometimes. The most unlikely heroes emerge when people need them most. Asterisk, the howling wind shook the windows of Murphy's Diner as Sarah wiped down tables for the third time that evening. Outside, the blizzard was getting worse by the hour, and Highway 2 had been closed since noon. The little town of Whitehorse, Montana, population 847, was completely cut off from the outside world. "Worst storm I've seen in 30 years, muttered old Pete from his corner booth, nursing his coffee like it was liquid gold. And that's saying something. Sarah nodded, glancing at the 12 other people huddled in the diner. The power had gone out twice already, and she was running low on everything: food, coffee, and most importantly, hope. Half the town was without heat, and the volunteer fire department was overwhelmed with emergency calls. That's when they heard the unmistakable sound of aircraft engines. Way too low and way too close. What in the hell? Pete stood up, pressing his face against the frosted window. Through the swirling snow, they could see lights descending toward the old airstrip on the edge of town. But this wasn't the crop duster that occasionally used the strip. This was something much larger. Is that? Sarah squinted through the storm. Is that Air Force One? Within minutes, the news spread through the diner's emergency radio. The president's plane had been forced to make an emergency landing. Mechanical issues, combined with the storm, had diverted them from their planned route to Seattle. Well, I'll be damned, Pete chuckled. Donald Trump, right here in Whitehorse. What are the odds? An hour later, the diner door opened with a blast of cold air and snow. Secret Service agents entered first, scanning the room with professional efficiency. Then, stamping snow off his shoes and shaking ice from his coat, Donald Trump walked into Murphy's Diner. "Folks," he said with his characteristic confidence, somehow managing to look presidential, even covered in snow. "Sorry for the dramatic entrance. Looks like we're all stuck together for a while." The diner fell silent. Here was the President of the United States, standing in their small-town refuge, looking remarkably calm for someone whose plane had just made an emergency landing in a blizzard. "Mr. President," Sarah said, finding her voice, "welcome to Murphy's. Coffee? That would be tremendous. Absolutely tremendous." Trump took off his coat and looked around the room. "How's everyone holding up in this storm?" What happened next surprised everyone in the room. Instead of waiting for others to take charge, instead of maintaining presidential distance, Trump rolled up his sleeves and got to work. "Sarah, is it?" he asked the waitress. "What's the situation in town? Who needs help?" Sarah explained about the power outages, the heating problems, and the elderly residents who were struggling in the cold. Trump listened intently, asking specific questions about resources, personnel, and logistics. "All right," Trump said, turning to address the room. "Here's what we're going to do. My security team has communication equipment that works even in this storm. We're going to coordinate with your emergency services and figure out how to help everyone who needs it." Pete looked skeptical. "With respect, Mr. President, this isn't exactly a job for the Secret Service." Trump grinned. "Pete, right? Let me tell you something. I've been in construction my whole life. I know about logistics. I know about getting things done in difficult conditions. And I know about teamwork. Storm or no storm, we're going to take care of this town." Over the next several hours, Trump transformed from visiting dignitary to emergency coordinator. He worked with the Secret Service to establish communication with isolated parts of town. He used his phone to contact federal emergency services, arranging for emergency supplies to be airlifted in as soon as the weather cleared. But more than that, He got personally involved in ways that nobody expected. "Mrs. Henderson," Trump said, into a Secret Service radio, speaking to an elderly woman trapped in her home without heat. "This is Donald Trump." "Yes, the president." "Listen, we're going to get you help, but I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly." For the next 20 minutes, Trump talked Mrs. Henderson through safely starting her backup generator, which she hadn't known how to operate. His voice was patient, encouraging, and completely focused on her well-being. "You did great, Mrs. Henderson. Really great. Now you stay warm, and we'll check on you again in a few hours." Around midnight, when Sarah was beginning to wonder how she was going to feed everyone with her dwindling supplies, Trump surprised her again. "What ingredients do you have?" he asked, washing his hands at the sink behind the counter. "Not much. Some eggs, potatoes, bacon, bread, perfect. I'm going to make breakfast for everyone." "Mr. President, you don't have to." "Sarah, I've been cooking for myself since I was a kid. And right now, these people need food, and they need to see that we're all in this together." For the next hour, the President of the United States worked the grill at Murphy's Diner, flipping eggs and frying bacon while telling stories about his childhood and asking the locals about their lives. The surreal scene had everyone relaxed and talking, the storm outside temporarily forgotten. "You know," Trump said as he plated scrambled eggs, "people think being president is all about big meetings and foreign policy. But really, it's about this, taking care of people when they need it most." Young Tommy Patterson, whose family ran the local hardware store, had been quiet all evening. Finally, he worked up the courage to speak. "Mr. President, my dad always said you didn't care about small towns like ours." Trump stopped cooking and looked directly at Tommy. "Tommy, let me tell you something. I've been to towns all across America. And you know what I've learned? The heart of this country isn't in the big cities or the capital. It's in places like Whitehorse. It's with people like your neighbors here who help each other through storms like this." He flipped a piece of bacon and continued, "Your dad might not agree with everything I do, and that's okay. But I hope tonight shows him that when it matters, when people need help, we're all Americans first." By dawn, the storm was beginning to clear. Trump had been awake all night, coordinating rescue efforts, checking on isolated residents via radio, and making sure everyone in the diner stayed fed and warm. He had used his presidential authority to authorize emergency helicopter flights and had personally called the governor to expedite state resources. But perhaps most importantly, he had spent the night simply being present with people who needed reassurance that they weren't forgotten. "Mr. President," said Chief Martinez from the volunteer fire department, who had trudged through the snow to reach the diner, "I don't know how to thank you. We've got everyone accounted for, everyone's safe, and it's largely because of the coordination you set up." Trump, looking tired but satisfied, shook the chief's hand. "Chief, your people did the real work. I just helped make some phone calls." As Air Force One's crew began preparing for departure, the word had spread throughout Whitehorse. Despite the cold and the remaining snow, dozens of townspeople gathered at the airstrip to see the president off. Sarah approached Trump as he prepared to board. "Mr. President, I have to ask, why did you do all this? You could have just waited in the plane until the storm passed." Trump looked back at the crowd of people who had come to say goodbye. Pete, with his weathered hands, Tommy Patterson with his parents, Mrs. Henderson bundled up but smiling, Chief Martinez still in his emergency gear. "Sarah, you know what I realized last night? Being president isn't about the title or the office. It's about moments like this, when you can actually help real people solve real problems." These folks didn't need speeches or policy papers. They needed someone to listen, to coordinate, to cook some eggs, and make sure everyone stayed safe. He paused looking genuinely moved by the experience. Besides, I learned something too. I learned that the people in small towns like Whitehorse, they're the ones who really understand what America is about. Taking care of each other, working together when things get tough, not giving up when the storms hit. As Air Force One taxied for takeoff, Trump waved from the window at the crowd below. But the real impact of those 48 hours wasn't in the presidential wave or the media coverage that would follow. It was in the conversation Tommy Patterson had with his father that evening. "Dad, I was wrong about him." "About what, son?" "About the president. He spent all night making sure Mrs. Henderson was okay. He cooked breakfast for everyone. He didn't act like he was better than us. He acted like he was one of us." Tommy's father, a lifelong skeptic of politicians, was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, son, people surprise you. Sometimes they're better than you expect them to be." The story of the president's emergency landing in Whitehorse spread quickly, but the people who were there knew the real story wasn't about the weather or the plane trouble. It was about a moment when someone with great power chose to use it. Not for personal gain or political advantage, but simply to help people who needed help. Pete, back in his corner booth at Murphy's Diner a week later, put it best when talking to a reporter who had come to cover the story. "You want to know what happened that night? I'll tell you what happened. We got to see who Donald Trump really is when nobody's watching, when there's no cameras, when there's nothing to gain politically. And what we saw was a man who cared more about making sure Mrs. Henderson stayed warm than he did about maintaining his presidential image." Pete took a sip of his coffee and looked out the window at the clear Montana sky. "That's the kind of president I can respect. Not because of his policies or his politics, but because when push came to shove, he showed up for people who needed him. And in my book, that's what real leadership looks like." The blizzard that had trapped them all together was long over, but its lessons remained. Sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is simply be present, roll up their sleeves, and remind people that they're not alone in the storm. And sometimes, just sometimes, people really are better than we expect them to be.